everybody, welcome back to my channel and thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. Now, if you've been with me for a little while, you know that I talked about this case months ago. I maybe even it's probably been over a year at this point. Time flies, but I have been getting messages on social media, comments on, other videos I'm doing, and people are saying, hey, Erin Patterson's on trial. A bunch of new stuff is coming out. Can you talk about it? So that is what I'm doing. And as a quick recap, on July 29th, 2023, 5 people sat down for what was supposed to be a peaceful lunch at the Leongatha home of Erin Patterson, a 48-year-old woman from rural Victoria, Australia. Within 24 hours, 4 of those guests had fallen violently ill with what appeared to be food poisoning, and within a week, 3 of them, Erin's in-laws, Gail and Don Patterson, and Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, were dead. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, a local pastor, he was clinging to life in critical condition. Now, the only person at that lunch table who walked away unscathed, seemingly unaffected, was Erin Patterson herself, and almost immediately, within a few days at least, suspicion began to swirl. Authorities began to believe that the group was poisoned by death cap mushrooms, one of the deadliest fungi on Earth, and all signs pointed to the beef Wellington Erin served that afternoon for lunch, a dish that typically features mushrooms as a key ingredient. While she initially denied wrongdoing, Erin became the central figure in the investigation, especially after it came to light that she had prepared the meal, but was the only one who didn't fall gravely ill. That's very important here, right? Erin, who did have a history of foraging mushrooms, she claimed that she used a mixture of supermarket mushrooms, fresh ones, and then also dried mushrooms from an Asian grocery store. But her story only got murkier from there. She admitted to discarding a food dehydrator, a critical piece of evidence, out of panic, and her account of the day kept shifting, including a claim that she later served leftover beef Wellington minus the mushrooms to her own children, despite believing that she and her guests had food poisoning, because according to Erin, she was sick within hours of eating this lunch, but then she gave the same meal to her children the next day for lunch, right? That doesn't make any sense. And as the investigation unfolded, more unsettling details came to light. Erin's estranged husband, Simon Patterson, had nearly died the year before from a mysterious illness after reportedly eating food that Erin had prepared. And that's where we left off in this case, with a grieving town, a nation captivated, and Erin Patterson under a cloud of suspicion. But as we now know, the story did not end there. Erin Patterson has maintained her innocence since her arrest in November of 2023. She and her defense team have claimed that the poisonings were a tragedy and a terrible accident. The trial began on April 29th, with Erin Patterson facing a life sentence if found guilty. And the trial's over. The jury has made their decision. If you've been following this case, you'll know that it just ended a few days ago as I'm filming this. I think I'm filming this on July 9th. I don't know what day it is anymore, but it ended a few days ago. The jury made their decision. She was found guilty. But during the trial, we have learned so much more about Erin, her relationship with her estranged husband, Simon, and a lot of evidence we didn't know before. So all the things when I first covered this case that we had questions about, and we were like, well, how did this happen? Or how did that happen? Or, where did she go? Do we have evidence of this? Yes, we do now have some supporting evidence, and all the holes in the timeline are being filled in. So we have a lot to talk about today. But before we dive in, let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Surfshark VPN. Today's video is sponsored by Surfshark VPN, which, let's be honest, might be the only shark I'd willingly invite into my life. Surfshark encrypts all your data sent via the internet, protecting your passwords, private messages, photos, videos, and other sensitive data. Now, I know that talking about VPNs can sound kind of techy and boring, but Surfshark is actually super easy to use and incredibly helpful, especially when you're someone like me who spends an unhealthy amount of time digging through international databases and streaming weird documentaries at 2 a.m. Here's what's cool about Surfshark though. You get unlimited device coverage, which means I've got it running on my laptop, my phone, my iPad, and it's not just myself that I want protected on the internet and getting the most out of an internet experience. I also want to make sure my family and loved ones get these benefits as well. So I can use one Surfshark subscription to put on all of my devices and all of my family's devices as well. My mom's phone, her tablet, her computer, my kids' phones and tablets, their video game systems. It's all included in that one subscription, which is amazing. Surfshark has servers in 100 countries, so I can switch to a UK server and finally watch that one BBC crime show they still won't give us in the US. And there's a no logs policy, which basically means Surfshark isn't out here collecting your data and selling it to some shady third party named Greg. Plus, with features like Clean Web, which blocks malware and sketchy ads, GPS spoofing for Android users, and even multi-hop, which routes your connection through 2 countries for an extra layer of privacy, Surfshark's not just a VPN, it's a digital invisibility cloak. Harry Potter, but make it hacker-proof. So if you're ready to browse safely, unlock content, or just finally buy plane tickets without your browser jacking the price up, go to surfshark.com/stephanieharlowe and use code stephanieharlowe at checkout to get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN. Once again, that's surfshark.com/stephanieharlowe to get 4 extra months unlimited devices. Thank you so much to Surfshark for sponsoring today's video, and let's dive in. Okay, to start today, I want to go back in the timeline because during the trial, we found out more about Erin Patterson's marriage to Simon Patterson, the events that happened during their time together, the events that eventually caused a strain in their relationship, and the dynamics between Erin, her estranged husband, and his family, the very people who would become violently ill after eating food that Erin prepared and served. And I think that this really does speak to motive, hugely speaks to motive. So Simon Patterson testified that he met Erin in 2004 when they were both working on the Monash City Council. Monash is a well-developed populous suburb in Melbourne's southeast, known for its large university and major hospital, and that's going to be important, so remember that for later. So at the time, Erin was working as an RSPCA representative, and Simon worked as a civil engineer on the council. And by the time Simon met Erin, she was pretty accomplished. She had a university degree in business and accounting, and she was a qualified air traffic controller who had previously worked at Melbourne's Tullamarine Airport. The two shared a love of travel, and Simon really liked that Erin was, smart, and she had a passion for learning and bettering herself. And he said, quote, "Erin is very intelligent. Some of the things that attracted me to her in the first place is definitely her intelligence. She's quite witty and can be quite funny." End quote. Simon and Erin got married in 2007. They settled down in Perth, and they would go on to have a son and a daughter, born in 2009 and 2014. Simon talked about how during their marriage, they went through multiple periods of separation that seemed to usually have been initiated by Erin, including one in 2009 when Erin abandoned her husband and infant son during a road trip across Australia. Now, during the trial, Erin did testify about this incident. She said that the birth of her son had been very traumatic for her. The doctors couldn't hear a heartbeat. She had to undergo an emergency C-section. The baby had to go into intensive care and spend some time in the neonatal unit. And Erin's also going to say that this sort of contributed to her distrust of doctors, which she's going to use as an excuse later for why she checked herself out of the hospital against medical advice after doctors told her that she had potentially been poisoned by lethal death cap mushrooms. She's going to use this as sort of a callback to her reasoning for not being comfortable and not trusting doctors. So Erin said that just a few months later, after giving birth to her son, she and Simon decided to finally embark on this road trip around Australia, which they had been kind of planning to do as their honeymoon. And they did this. They started in April of 2009, the same month her son's born. But by November, Erin said she was over it. And she stated, quote, "It had been a good holiday, but I'd had enough. I wanted to sleep in a real bed, and it was getting harder to camp with my son." End quote. Yeah, I mean, honestly, going on a road trip, a cross-country road trip with a newborn is wild. That's crazy. I mean, some people might say they would do it, and there'd be no issues, and you would be a better, more patient, less overstimulated person than me, because absolutely not. We're going to wait until that kid's like 4 or 5 before we even attempt a cross country road trip. But Simon kind of made it seem like Erin just took off and she was like, I'm all set. I'm out. I can't do this. You stay with our kid. I'm going home. But Erin made it seem like both she and Simon agreed that it was okay for her to fly home to Perth, while Simon and the newborn infant baby would drive back alone. And they didn't arrive home until a week after Erin got back. After this, Simon and Erin lived apart for some time. So Erin was staying in a cottage, and Simon, whether this was Erin's idea or Simon's idea, he lived in a van in a nearby caravan park. So Erin abandons them on a cross-country trip, her husband and her son, her infant son. She goes home to Perth, and then when Simon gets back, she's like, I'm gonna stay in the house, and you're going to live in a car for a while, okay, while we're separated. Really awkward. So Simon and Erin would eventually get some marriage counseling. They started living together again, while Erin operated a small used bookstore in Pemberton through 2011 and 2012. And during this time, Erin and Simon went through more brief periods of separation. And then in 2013, they moved back to Victoria, where they purchased a home in Korumburra after their daughter was born in 2014. So they settled in this area because Simon's family all lived in Korumburra or very close around that area. Simon's uncle, Ian Wilkinson, one of Erin's victims, he actually was the pastor at the Baptist church, the Korumburra Baptist church, where Simon and all his family attended services. So Simon and Erin moved to Korumburra because they wanted to be physically close to Simon's family, but this move also brought Erin emotionally closer to Simon's family, his parents, his siblings, etc. Now, in 2015, Simon and Erin separated again for a final time, but they remained friendly with each other. They continued to raise their children. Simon was like, yeah, we talked all the time. You know, we chatted, we texted. It was very, very friendly, very congenial, no issues, no tension. And when Erin first met Simon, she was aware that he was Christian and he came from a very religious family, whereas at that time she described herself as being a fundamentalist atheist. Erin said, quote, I was trying to convert him into being an atheist, but things happened in reverse. I became a Christian, end quote. Now, Erin claims her conversion happened in 2015 during her first ever church service at the Korumburra Baptist Church, where, like I said, Simon's uncle Ian Wilkinson was the pastor. And Erin told the court, quote, I had been approaching religion as an intellectual exercise up until that point. Does it make sense? Is it rational? But I had a religious experience there that quite overwhelmed me, end quote. Now, I don't believe her. And you'll see why. You know, we'll find out that Erin has some Facebook friends she talks to, and she's always very steady and solid on the point that she is an atheist. She doesn't believe in religion and things like that. And I think it's funny, and not funny as much as like maybe problematic and sort of like a red flag, an early sign of failure, that when you met the man you were going to marry, you were like, I'm an atheist. I don't follow religion. I don't believe in religion. He's very religious, very. I'm going to turn him to the dark side. You know, like I'm going to make him believe what I believe so that we can, you know, remain together and have these parallel beliefs. But then she's like, no, instead, it was me. I converted. No, I don't think she ever did. Now, according to Simon's testimony, Erin was never all that religious, and she didn't even attend church services regularly until that separation in 2015, because she claimed that, you know, she didn't want to disrupt the proceedings, the church proceedings with small children. They had young children, and she was like, no, I don't want to bring, you know, babies and stuff into church, which is a fine reason at first. But, you know, once they're like 2-3 years old, if you can bring an infant on a road trip across the country, think you can bring them to Sunday services. All right, that's all I'm going to say. So anyways, in 2015, Simon began taking their 2 children on the weekends. So this is when Erin and Simon kind of had their final separation. They're not divorced. They're not living together. They're not together. They're not a couple. Simon's taking the kids on the weekend, meaning he would have them on Sunday for church. And that is when he said Erin began regularly attending church services after they had separated. Now, we did talk about this briefly in the earlier video I did on this case, but Erin's mother passed away in 2019 and she left her estate to her two daughters. And this would be the second inheritance that Erin received. She'd also been left roughly $2 million in 2006 when her grandmother died, and that sum would be paid out twice a year in small increments. So this money would ultimately be used to purchase two homes, one in the suburb of Glen Waverly and another on Gibson Street in Leongatha. So this is actually the house that Erin Patterson would build. And Erin shared legal ownership of both of these homes with Simon, who she was still legally married to, and who, according to Simon, he had hopes that the two would eventually reconcile and get back together. So even though they'd separated in 2015, we're kind of over here in like the 2022 time with the timeline. It's been several years. Simon says he still felt that there was a chance they would eventually get back together and start living together. And like I said, according to Simon, he and Erin still really had a good and amicable relationship with each other even after the 2015 separation. And he agreed in court that, yeah, he felt Erin putting both their names on the titles of the houses was a sign of goodwill. But then in November of 2022, something happened that Simon believes fractured their relationship for good, caused Erin to get really angry with him. Now, at this time, in November of 2022, Erin noticed that Simon had listed himself as being separated on his tax return for the first time, even though this had been the state of their relationship for several years, like I said, since 2015. But in 2022, Simon's listing himself as separated. And on the stand, Erin denied all of this. She said, I wasn't upset about the change in the tax filing. According to Erin, she was upset about something that happened a few weeks later when she filed for child support, which was, to be fair, sort of triggered by Simon making that change on his tax form. And then she filed for child support and requested that Simon help her pay for their children's school fees. And I'm going to be upfront with you here, because I 1,000,000% believe Erin poisoned these people intentionally, like 1,000,000% believe it. I also believe that all of this that we're talking about, the tax return and the school fees and the child support, all of this culminated into the motive that Erin had to plan that lethal lunch that would take place the following year. All of that being said, I actually agree with her on why she was upset. And I think it was really messed up, honestly, on the part of Simon to put her through all of this. Now, does that justify anything she did? Does it make what she did right? No, of course not. I totally see why she was upset and why she would have felt betrayed. And that's a key point in this case, the betrayal that I believe Erin felt. So an important thing to remember is that Erin is getting inheritances from her grandmother and then her mother several years later when they sadly pass away. And she's got a lot of money because of this. And it's important to understand that the money that Erin had received from her grandmother and her mother had helped herself and Simon create a life for themselves and for their families. Mainly Simon's family, not just for their children, but the extended family of Simon, because Erin really didn't have a lot of family at this point. Her parents had passed away, her grandmother passed away. I don't think she was close with her sister. And Simon admitted on the stand that they never would have been able to make it if not for that money. And he also said that Erin was always very generous with this money. He said for both himself and Erin, money has never been a main driver or a motivator. And we would find out that Erin had actually loaned Simon's siblings money to purchase homes, and she did this without charging interest, right? So she basically just gave them money, a loan, to purchase homes in cash, and then they would pay her, but she did it without charging interest. And if you understand what a great thing that is and what a gift that is and how it's really a sign, that you care about someone, because it's like, hey, the bank's going to charge you who knows what as far as interest. It's going to be based on your credit. It could be 7%. It could be 12%, whatever. It's going to depend on a lot. But based on your credit and all these other factors, the bank's going to charge you interest. So if you're paying a home loan for 15 to 30 years, you're also paying hundreds of thousands of dollars more in interest. So Erin is giving this money to Simon's siblings and saying, hey, here's the cash to buy a house. You can pay me back, but you don't have to pay me interest. So Erin also testified that Simon's parents had always been really good to her and treated her like a daughter, even after the separation in 2015. But in 2022, when things became strained between herself and Simon, she felt that his parents, Don and Gal, started choosing sides. And it was not her side that they were choosing. So text messages show that Erin was feeling very left out and she was hurt leading up to even that November time when Simon changed his tax return. She had not been invited to her mother-in-law Gail's 70th birthday party, and on October 14th, 2022, Simon texted Erin to ask if she was going to be at his mother's birthday lunch the next day, and she wrote back that she hadn't even been aware of it. And this prompted Simon to tell her, oh, hey, I thought my father, Don, had invited you, but maybe there was some sort of miscommunication. Maybe he got things mixed up. And Erin texted back, quote, I'm not too sure how your dad could have been confused. Seems that my invite tomorrow is a bit of an afterthought and not even from your parents, so I might pass. Thanks. What I reckon is everybody forgot to actually invite me to this thing, and I feel very, very hurt about that. End quote. And I'm not going to lie to you and say that this is some overblown reaction. I don't think it is. I think it's very valid. She feels like an afterthought. She feels a little rejected. She kind of feels like, oh, maybe they're only inviting me because they feel like they have to, and that's why they are inviting me last minute because they're hoping, I made other plans or I can't come, and that's why I'm getting this last minute invite, which is translating to Erin. All of that is translating to Erin. These people don't want me there. I am not important to these people. I am betrayed even after all I've done for them, right? That's what she is thinking. And Simon's response to Erin wasn't super reassuring, right? He was like, hey, you can think whatever you want, but the lunch is very important to my mother and you've been invited, so hope you can make it. And Erin wrote back, okay, yeah, I'll go and I'll bring the kids, blah, 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 whatever. Everything seems to be fine, right? But maybe not. Maybe there's still tension and maybe there's still some resentment because the very next day, Erin would text Simon again. Quote, I'm sorry for shouting at you this afternoon. I was feeling very hurt and lashed out. I'd like to not do that again. End quote. So this was the day of the party, so they must have had words at the party, and Erin raised her voice, and then Simon must have as well, because he replied back, and he was like, yeah, apology accepted. I'm also sorry for getting a little, elevated, like, let's put it all behind us. But then the following month, Simon listed himself as separated on his tax return. And then a few weeks after that, Erin filed for child support, which she would end up getting. But because Simon had quit his job, he was only ordered to pay around $40 a month in child support for 2 kids, which obviously we all know that's basically nothing. Now there's going to be a lot of people who are like, well, Erin had a lot of money. She didn't need it. Hey, maybe that's even what Simon thought, but it really doesn't matter. That doesn't matter to me. He should have been paying her more. He should have been, pulling his weight and contributing to his children. I agree with her there. Now, at that time, Simon also stopped helping Erin financially with really anything, especially and specifically the kids' school fees and their medical stuff. So Erin and Simon's son, I don't want to get too much into it because he's minor, but he had some medical issues. And he needed, to go to the doctor and he needed surgeries and things. And basically, Simon told Erin that the child support people had informed him that his child support payment was intended to cover these things. And Simon claimed that he was having this conversation with Erin before he knew that the payment would only be $40 a month. But still. And then after you knew it was only $40 a month, did you start contributing more? I don't know. On November 21st, Erin messaged Simon and asked him to pay a surgery bill for their son. And Simon replied, quote, the Department of Human Services instructed me not to pay you anything for the kids from now on, so I cannot pay that, I'm afraid, end quote. And Erin was like, this money isn't going to me, it's going to the doctor. And Simon said, nope, this is exactly the kind of thing I was instructed to not pay for, so I'm not paying it. And this is, like I said, after she's filed for child support, but before they know what the child support actual sum is going to be. And so even before she's getting any money from him, he's like, no, the child support that they're going to order me to pay, which they'd probably order some back pay or whatever, that's going to cover all this stuff, so I'm not going to pay it. My own kids' medical bills. Okay. So during the trial, we heard that Erin had some online friends she'd made in a true crime Facebook group. Now, that group had initially been dedicated to the 2010 trial of Kelly Lane, a former water polo player and teacher who was convicted of the 1996 murder of her newborn baby. Very sad, very tough case. Now, the group initially had upwards of 2,000 members, but after the trial concluded, the group began to dwindle, eventually reducing to about 20 or 30 core people. And at that time, the members remaining would chat about, a variety of things with, each other. And they would talk about true crime, but they'd talk about, their own lives and what was happening in the world. And one member, Christine Hunt, said, quote, "It was mostly around current affairs, what was happening in the world, a lot of discussion around royalty, politics, crime, and a lot of personal stories, so we got to know each other. It was a small enough group where we really get kind of leaning into each other's lives and we're a support for each other," end quote. Oh, and these members of this Facebook group, they were like, Erin was the best detective, right? When it came to researching things, when it came to finding information nobody else could find about this case and these cases, Erin was the one who would always do it. So with her Facebook friends, Erin would discuss a lot of things: her children, her husband Simon, and the struggles of being a single mother. Christine Hunt said that they all understood that Erin was self-sufficient, but she had concerns about Simon paying his fair share for the upbringing of their kids, and she described Simon as being very controlling and coercive at times. Erin also spoke about Simon's family, claiming they were very demanding, and she felt challenged by these demands, specifically around the children attending faith-based schools. Christine Hunt said, quote, "She found that challenging, and in particular, the decisions around things like divorce, separation, how the kids should be educated and brought up. She found all that very controlling and demanding," end quote. Hunt also said that Erin did attend church, but she told the group that she didn't believe in God and she only went to services because of the family situation, and she would feel very uneasy when she was away from her children, which is going back to Erin's testimony where she said she had some religious revelation and this complete this moment, and it was a whole revealing thing about religion, and that's when I believed and I was converted. I don't believe she ever was. I think it's bullshit. So starting in December of 2022, Erin began talking to her Facebook friends about the child support thing, as well as talking about this in a Signal group chat that included Simon and his parents. And rightfully so. Once again, Erin's pissed. She's pissed when she's talking to her friends. She's also not really pulling any punches when she's in this group chat with Simon and his parents. On December 5th, Erin sent a message to the group chat with Simon and his parents, and that message said, quote, "I'm sorry, but I can't stop thinking about the comment that Don made on the phone, that the financial issues are probably easily solved and that Simon can reverse the single thing in his tax return. That is mind-boggling in its implication. If that's really what he said he would do, reversing the single thing is basically telling the government that Simon and I are not separated anymore and that we're still married and living together as a couple and have shared finances so that they consider our income as a whole. The immediate implications of that would be that I can no longer claim family tax benefit, which is around $15,000 a year and which would be my only income. It is a government benefit that was foregone the entire time Simon was working on land gyps, even though we didn't share finances either. We were basically lying to the government, telling them that we were a family with shared finances so they wouldn't make him pay child support. I would have been entitled to about $30K a year child support from Simon during the 3 years he was at Land Gyps, but I didn't claim it because I foolishly trusted him to do right by me and the kids when it came to crunch. But I was wrong to do so. It seems to be that canceling in school fees and refusing to help has been a punishment to me for playing with child support, which is unconscionable. Both parents have a duty to financially support the children they made," end quote. I disagree with none of this. Because Simon also started refusing to pay the money for his children's schooling. And so Erin ended up switching them to different schools, probably putting them in either a less expensive school or a public school that you don't have to pay for. And then Simon had an issue with that. And Erin is basically like, what the hell? You're not helping me pay for this school. Why do I have to send them to the school you want them to be sent to, but you're not helping me with the financial part of that? I disagree with nothing she said. So the following day, Simon messaged Erin directly. And he said, quote, "Hello, Erin. Mom and Dad told me you asked them over to yours for a discussion yesterday. I understand there are two main issues. One, how our son is going, and two, finances for our kids. I have read the messages you sent them in our Signal group chat since and Dad's responses. I am keen to talk to you about our son and how we can best work together to help him with where he's at now and for the future. I am also keen to talk to you about the financial arrangements to try to come to an understanding and agreement between us. Reading all the messages, the financial issues are very emotive now and would likely be difficult," end quote. So basically, Simon's like, hey, clearly you're pissed. I see that you're like talking to my parents about this. Like, we should be talking about this. What are you talking to them about for? Like, I feel like if we could talk and work together, we could, figure something out. So that same day, Erin messaged her Facebook friends and said, quote, "Don rang me last night to say that he thought there was a solution to all this if Simon and I get together and try to talk and pray together. And then he also said Simon had indicated there was a solution to financial issues if I withdraw the child support claim." My head nearly exploded, and I was like, what? And Don goes, "Oh, sorry, just ignore what I said. I don't want to get involved." So anyways, I sent a group message to them all last night saying how Simon is behaving is unconscionable and asking me to withdraw the child support claim is wrong and disadvantages me and his children, and how dare he, etc. Don messaged me to say he and Gail don't want to get involved in the financial things, but just hope we will pray for the kids. So I replied this morning saying I understand it's uncomfortable and awkward for them, but I want to copy them into this stuff because Simon needs to be accountable for the decisions he is making that are hurting his children, and I would hope they care about their grandchildren enough to care what Simon is doing. That's when Don said they tried to talk to him, but he refused to talk about it, so they're staying out of it, but want us to pray together. His mom was horrified I had claimed child support. Why isn't she horrified? Her son is such a deadbeat that I had no choice but to claim. Don said they tried to talk to him, but he refused to talk about it, so they're staying out of it, but want us to pray together. I'm sick of this shit, and I want nothing to do with them. I thought his parents would do the right thing, but it seems they're concerned about not wanting to feel uncomfortable and not wanting to get involved in their son's personal matters are overriding that, so fuck them, end quote. Clearly, she's very pissed, but once again, no lies detected. She was very honest with her friends about what she told Simon and his parents in the group chat. And once again, she's right, and she's starting to feel a little betrayed and a little hurt that she is on the side of what's right for herself, for her children, for Simon. And his parents, it kind of initially seemed like they were trying to take his side and be like, oh, just work with him. And when she pushed back, they were like, well, we don't want to be involved. We don't want to be involved. Instead of talking to their son and being like, hey, man up, pay your fair share, and, stop being an asshole. So the following day, Erin talked to her friends online about the situation again, saying, quote, "His parents sent me a message yesterday afternoon, and Simon sent me one last night, but I've read neither, and I don't think I will. I don't want to hear it. Simon will just be horrible and be gaslighting and abusive, and it will ruin my day, and his parents will be more weasel words about not getting involved, so I think I'm just going to move on. I don't need anything from any of these people. Simon's parents say they don't want to take sides, but by their very action they have. They've had Simon over for tea every night for 3 months, and never once picked up the phone to me since the separation and asked if I'm okay and need help. So that tells me their choice. Simon wants to walk away from his responsibilities too. Well, that's his choice. Maybe it's easier if he's not involved in even paying their school fees, meaning I can choose their school all by myself and I don't have to refer to him if he wants them to go to a private Christian school, and then he can help pay for it. If he doesn't want to help pay for it, then I don't have to send them, do I? So maybe it just means I have even more freedom about choices. A blessing in disguise," end quote. Here's where Erin starts to veer off the truth a little bit. Now, is Simon abusive? Is he a gaslighter? Is he manipulative, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know. But what I do know from evidence is that even after the separation in 2015, Simon's parents were very communicative and helpful to Erin. There's texts where they're checking in on her. She was invited to things. I mean, just because you're not invited to tea every single night, it doesn't mean you're not invited to things. They were not like icing her out. They hadn't not picked up the phone to check on her or ask if she needed help since the separation. That's ludicrous. There's plenty of evidence that they were very, very supportive and always there for her and her children. Not agreeing with her and not helping her in this child support thing, I don't agree with that, but they were not uncommunicative or cold to her or unhelpful. So a few days later, on December 9th, Simon messaged Erin again, expressing that he'd learned more about the financials that week and he felt they could easily sort it out, and he was intending to contact a mediator to help the two communicate about the issue. So overall, maybe that's when Simon was like, oh shit, it's only $40 a month. That's nothing. We can talk about this and work it out. But overall, it does seem that Erin felt betrayed by both Simon and his parents. Remember that during her police interview, Erin told law enforcement that she would never want to hurt Gal and Don Patterson because they'd always been there for her. And with her own parents gone, they were the only family she had. And she did state to the police that even after the separation, they'd been good to her and she'd been included in family functions. But it did seem that things were changing and the Pattersons were not being as supportive or helpful to her as she would have wanted in this situation with the child support. And this may have felt like a huge betrayal and even an abandonment to Erin. And this, in my opinion, and I think the prosecution's, this was most likely Erin Patterson's motive for the lunch where she would serve the deadly death cap mushrooms. And like I said, the prosecution did opt out of disclosing any one particular motive, but they built a case and asked questions and said certain things that would definitely lead you to believe they felt the motive was that Erin had been betrayed by Simon and his parents, and she wanted to get back at them. Because remember, Simon was invited to that lunch too. He just decided not to go. So let's go through the timeline to see what led up to all of this and how the events unfolded. Let's first talk about iNaturalist, a community-driven website and mobile app where people can record, share, and identify observations of plants, animals, fungi, and other organisms out in nature. The prosecution showed evidence that on April 18th, 2023, a user on iNaturalist found suspected death cap mushrooms in Loch, which is a small rural town in the South Gippsland region of Victoria. The prosecution showed that 10 days later, on April 28th, Erin Patterson's cell phone traveled to Loch before returning to her home in the neighboring town of Leongatha. And then 2.5 hours later, Erin purchased a Sunbeam food dehydrator from a store in Leongatha. So from March to May, Erin started posting about dehydrating mushrooms in her true crime Facebook group. A member of that group, Daniela Barkley, testified that Erin was excited when she purchased the food dehydrator, and she posted a message to their group saying, quote, "I've been hiding powdered mushrooms in everything. Mixed it into chocolate brownies yesterday. The kids had no idea." End quote. Another message from Erin stated, quote, "So fun fact, the dehydrator reduces mushroom mass by 90%. Do you think Woolies would mind if I brought the dehydrator into their vegetable section and dry things before I buy them?" End quote. Erin also sent a photo in the chat of the dehydrator along with images of chopped up mushrooms. And I looked it up and I found out that death cap mushrooms remain lethal even if they are dehydrated, even if they're cooked, frozen, dried, because the deadly toxins are incredibly stable and not destroyed by heat or preservation methods. Now, death caps contain amotoxins, primarily alpha-amytin, which can survive high cooking temperatures and remain intact after drying or dehydrating. Also, these amotoxins do not break down in the stomach, and they're resistant to freezing, acid, or enzymatic digestion. So if Erin was able to gather some death cap mushrooms from Loch, because she saw that they were there, and then she went there, and then she brought them home and dehydrated them, and then later rehydrated them in a dish like beef Wellington, the toxins would still be fully active, even if she ground them up and made them into a powder. They would still be fully active and capable of causing multiple organ failure. Now, according to Daniela Barkley, Erin and the rest of the group often talked about cooking. In fact, it was one of the main topics they discussed. So Erin talking about dehydrating mushrooms and hiding them in foods to trick her children into eating healthier was not odd at the time. Another member of this Facebook group, Jenny Hay, also remembered how energetic Erin was about the food dehydrator. And she was really excited about it and always talking about it. And she was particularly interested in using it for mushrooms. Hay stated, quote, "I remember her making mushroom soup. I remember her talking about blitzing it to make powder to put in things so the kids would eat it." End quote. And later, in the next video, because this is going to be 2 videos, but I'll make sure they're close together, only a few days apart, so you don't have to wait. But in the next video, we're going to talk about how when multiple toxicologists and stuff went through the leftovers of the beef Wellington, some of these people did not find any evidence of death caps, But on closer examination with basically like a chemical examination, not just a visual examination, they did find traces of death caps. And I think that's because Erin dehydrated the death cap mushrooms and then ground them up into a powder. And then put other regular mushrooms in there as well so that nobody would notice. On May 21st, another iNaturalist user posted another photo along with the exact location of where death cap mushrooms were growing in Outram, which is a small town south of Currumbura. Now, this user, I believe, actually dropped a pin so that everybody would know exactly where the location was. And I know a lot of people are probably like, hey, this is kind of dangerous. Like, you shouldn't be telling people where these things are. I mean, the whole point is nobody's going to think that someone's going to go and travel to these areas to get these mushrooms to kill people. They're going to think like, hey, if you're a forager, which is a lot of these people on the iNaturalist website and app are foragers. If you're a forager, be careful because these death cap mushrooms can look like other mushrooms, but they're very lethal. So be careful if you're foraging for mushrooms. Be careful if you're walking in this area and you have animals, pets, children, etc. Just be careful in general. They're putting these pictures up and putting the locations to protect people, not to give people like Erin Patterson basically a way to kill others. So that's not what that's for. That is what she used it for. And the prosecution would show that the following day, May 22nd, Erin Patterson's cell phone traveled back to Locke and then to Outram. So she went to the first place where the death cap mushrooms have been spotted and then the second place. And during the investigation that would follow Erin's lethal lunch, her electronic devices were taken by police and forensically examined. And these devices included a laptop that was found hidden in Erin's son's room. I mean, maybe it wasn't hidden like she would say it wasn't hidden, but I think it was like in his closet on like a top shelf, and it had like something on it. And the police said, they wouldn't have spotted it if they hadn't been like really searching. They might have overlooked it or missed it because it was definitely like tucked away. And when going through Erin's internet searches, it was discovered that on May 28th, someone used that laptop to access the iNaturalist website and view posts about a death cap mushroom sighting at Bricker Reserve in Moorabbin, which is a Melbourne suburb. I hope I said it right. Now, this happened at 7:23 p.m. That's when those posts were accessed. And then 3 minutes later, data from that same computer showed that an order for food delivery was placed at the Currumbura Middle Hotel, which is a pub, a place that serves food and drinks. And the prosecution informed the jury that this establishment confirmed that the food order was placed and then delivered to Erin Patterson's address. And I think the prosecution let us know this because they wanted to knock down any objections from the defense that anyone could have used that computer and it couldn't be proved. The person who was searching the iNaturalist site for death cap mushroom sightings was Erin Patterson. But since she ordered the food and had it delivered to her house 3 minutes later, that would be a pretty hard objection to make stick, right? So during their investigation, police found an entry in the personal diary of Gal Patterson. This entry was dated June 28th, 2023, and it read, quote, Erin, St. Vincent's, arm lump, end quote. And this is important because not even a month later, Erin would invite the parents and aunt and uncle of Simon, along with Simon, to her home for a lunch to discuss medical issues. And the prosecution contended that Erin had pretended to be sick with cancer in order to ensure that her guests made it to this special lunch she had planned for them. The prosecution would tell the jury that this was Erin laying the groundwork for this lunch invitation and that she had told her mother-in-law, Gal Patterson, that she had to go to St. Vincent's Medical Center to get a lump in her arm checked out. On that afternoon of June 28th, Gal texted Erin saying, quote, Hi, Erin. Just wondering how you got on with your appointment. Love, Gail and Don, end quote. And Erin did not reply to this message until the following day. And at that point, she apologized for her delay in answering the message, but told Gail that a needle biopsy had been taken and she was expected to return the following week for an MRI. Obviously, the police looked into this, and they found out that there was no Medicare records, that Erin Patterson had an appointment at St. Vincent's on June 28th, and after directly contacting the administration at the hospital, it was confirmed that Erin Patterson had not had any appointments with them. The police took it one step further, and they executed search warrants at several medical centers, Mount Waverly, Leongatha, Corumburra. They obtained all medical records for Erin Patterson for the period between January 1st of 2021 to August 8th of 2023, and they found there were no records of any assessment, diagnosis, or treatment for any kind of cancer. All right, so Erin told Gail that she needed to go in for an MRI the following week, right? Which was a lie, but that's what she told her. And then on July 6th, Gail sent Erin a message asking if she had gotten any information on the test, if she knew anything else. And Erin replied, telling Gail, I'm okay, but I'll have more to say about this later. Now, that later would come on July 16th when Erin Patterson attended a service at Corumbara Baptist Church, where she then extended an invitation to Gail Patterson, Don Patterson, Simon Patterson, Ian Wilkinson, and Heather Wilkinson for lunch. Erin told her invited guests that there was a bit to digest about her fake medical tests, and she wanted to talk in person to discuss these medical issues and how, they were going to talk to her children about it, how they're going to break it to the kids. And this is why Erin claimed she did not want her son and daughter at the lunch, because remember, Erin had arranged for her children to be away from the house that afternoon by sending them to a movie. Now, the Wilkinsons were actually surprised they'd been invited to this lunch, and we were able to hear this directly from Ian Wilkinson, the only guest who survived the beef Wellington. Ian testified that he and his wife Heather hadn't known Erin that well. He would see Erin at church, but their conversations were pretty brief and casual. Heather talked to and saw Erin a bit more than Ian, but he said that neither one of them would have described their relationship with Erin as close. Ian stated, quote, "I would say our relationship was friendly, amicable. It didn't have much depth. We were more like acquaintances. We didn't see a great deal of each other," end quote. Although the Wilkinsons had shared meals with Erin before during family gatherings and holidays, they'd never been invited to dine at Erin's home before. And although it was kind of out of the blue, Heather Wilkinson was actually really looking forward to the meal, and everyone wanted to know what kind of news Erin had to share with them. They were concerned, obviously. Everyone except Simon Patterson, that is. So the lunch was scheduled for June 29th, but the previous day, June 28th, Simon texted Erin to tell her he didn't feel comfortable attending the lunch. He said, quote, "Sorry, I feel too uncomfortable about coming to lunch with you, Mom, Dad, Heather, and Ian tomorrow, but I'm happy to talk about your health and implications of that at another time if you'd like to discuss on the phone. Just let me know," end quote. Now, according to Simon, things had been far too tense with Erin. It was volatile. You had nothing to do with that, dude, but okay, it was volatile. And like I said, they'd always been friendly and would chat often over the phone and via text, but since November and all the issues, he said Erin had become curt, cold, and sometimes wouldn't reply to his calls or messages at all. But that day, June 28th, Erin was insistent that Simon should attend the lunch the following day, and she replied back, trying really hard to convince him to come and kind of trying to guilt him into it. She said, quote, "That's really disappointing. I've spent many hours this week preparing lunch for tomorrow, which has been exhausting in light of the issues I'm facing. And I spent a small fortune on beef eye fillet to make beef Wellingtons because I wanted it to be a special meal, as I may not be able to host a lunch like this again for some time. It's important to me that you're all there tomorrow and that I can have the conversations that I need to have," end quote. All right, so she spent a fortune on this beef eye fillet, and she's saying, "I want this to be a special meal. That's why I'm choosing to make beef Wellington. This is special. I may not be able to do this again for some time. Remember that." Simon didn't care. Simon didn't care. He was like, whatever. I don't even think he responded to that text message, and he ultimately would not attend the lunch at Erin's home. But it was very clear that she wanted him there, which means that Erin really wanted her estranged husband, the father of her children, to consume those death cap mushrooms as well. And honestly, now that I think about it, maybe that's why Ian and Heather were invited. They were kind of collateral damage. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out why Erin Patterson would have wanted these two individuals dead. They barely knew each other. They'd always been kind to her. They had not gotten involved in the whole tax return child support fiasco. There was really no reason for Erin to have any issues with the Wilkinsons. But Erin did have documented issues with Simon and his parents. We could see that from the text. So maybe she thought that if it was only Simon, Gail, and Don, it would seem suspicious. But if two people who Erin did not have any reported issues with also fell ill, it would seem more accidental and less targeted. And the fact that Simon never responded and said, like, "No, I'm still not coming," or "Yes, I am coming," that's maybe why Erin went ahead with the lunch, hoping that at the last minute, he would show up and change his mind and he would be there, because she had made it seem so important that he was going to be there because she had this medical news to share that affected her and obviously the children. And so she was hoping that would be enough to convince him if the fancy beef Wellingtons weren't enough. So now we're at the point of July 29th, 2023. The day of the fateful lunch. On this day, Simon Patterson called his son around midday and found out that the kids were at McDonald's with one of the son's friends, and they told him they planned to go to the movies afterwards. Simon then spoke to his daughter and made plans to pick them up from the movies, drive his son back to Erin's, and then bring his daughter back home with him. Now, Ian and Heather Wilkinson were picked up from their home by the Pattersons a little after noon, and they arrived at Erin's house around 12:30 p.m. Erin met her 4 guests and brought them inside, where they went into the kitchen. They took part in some general conversation and then started talking about the house. And Erin mentioned that there was a pantry behind the wall, and Ian said that his wife Heather was very interested in this because they had just been building a pantry in their home. So when Heather heard about the pantry, she started walking in that direction to look at it, and Gail Patterson followed her. But Ian said that he could tell Erin was very reluctant to have guests in the pantry, and he didn't end up following Heather and Gail because he stayed put, assuming Erin was just embarrassed that her pantry might have been messy, but he could tell she was visibly like, don't go in my pantry. She didn't want them in there. The Pattersons and the Wilkinsons then went outside with Erin into the garden where she talked about some of her plants. Then they went back inside to the kitchen where Erin began preparing lunch. As Erin was plating the food, Heather and Gail offered to help, but Ian said that Erin rejected these offers, put all the food on all the plates herself. We know the meal consisted of mashed potatoes, green beans, and single portion beef Wellingtons. What's beef Wellington? Beef Wellington is a classic, luxurious, delicious dish made by wrapping a tenderloin of beef in a layer of finely chopped mushrooms encased in a puff pastry and baked until golden brown. There's like this delicious savory sauce that goes with it. Oh, it's so good. I'm starving now. Now, listen, single serving beef Wellingtons, they do exist. That's what Erin did. She gave each person their own beef Wellington. They're usually called mini Wellingtons. This is more for like a fancy restaurant kind of thing if you have like separate people at separate tables. But the traditional family style presentation would be to make just one large beef Wellington roast. So a big, like long kind of meat roast with all the stuff in there and wrapped in like a phyllo dough, right? And then you bake it all together, and then you would carve it or slice it at the table and serve it. That's the traditional presentation. If you're having dinner with your family, that's how you would do it. Why? Because it's way easier than making single serve ones. Way easier. Individual beef Wellingtons, instead of like a large beef Wellington that would be sliced and portioned out, would call for a lot more culinary skill, a lot more time and effort. So why did Erin Patterson make individual beef Wellingtons, which would take more time and effort, instead of one large one that would be sliced and portioned out? Well, probably for the same reason she decided to serve everyone their meals on 4 large gray plates while she put her meal on a smaller orangey tan plate, because she knew that she had made her own beef Wellington without the poisonous death cap mushrooms, and she didn't want there to be any mistake or mix-up made during that meal that might have her getting one of the lethal meals. She didn't want to put them all on the same plates because, you're bringing the food to the table, maybe you get it mixed up. She didn't want to take any chances. So once the beef Wellingtons were all plated up, Erin and her guests sat down at the table, they said grace, then they began to eat. And everyone at the table loved the meal. In fact, Gail Patterson raved about it. She ate it, but she couldn't even finish it. And Don Patterson, her husband, ended up eating his entire portion as well as half of his wife's Wellington. And during lunch, Erin told her guests that she had what she called potentially life-threatening ovarian cancer, and she was concerned about breaking the news to her children. Now, during the trial, Erin Patterson denied this. She denied telling them that she had been diagnosed with cancer. She stated, quote, "I can't remember the precise words, but I do know that what I was trying to communicate was that I was undergoing investigations around ovarian cancer and might need treatment in that regard in the future," end quote. Well, that's a word salad if I ever heard one, considering that there's no medical records, no evidence that Erin ever saw a doctor for this concern or had any tests related to ovarian cancer. There's Google searches, there's internet searches for symptoms of ovarian cancer and like what the treatment would be, but that's just research, right? Because remember, Erin's true crime Facebook friend said, if you need someone to research and get everything that you could get, Erin was the one. That's just research for how she sells this fake story to her lunch guests. And Erin claimed that during the lunch, Don Patterson was talking about his brother who was battling cancer. And so the cancer topic lingered to the end of the meal. And then she claims she mentioned that she'd had an issue a year or two prior where she thought she'd had ovarian cancer. And Erin said, quote, "Then I'm not proud of this, but I led them to believe that I might be needing some treatment in regards to that in the next few weeks or months," end quote. According to Erin, she did not lie about having cancer because she wanted to use it to lure her guests to her home for lunch. She was just struggling with long-term concerns about her weight, and she was embarrassed to admit that she was going to be undergoing gastric bypass surgery. And Erin said, hey, I knew I might need help from Gal and Don leading up to and after this planned gastric bypass surgery. And so I kept this cancer lie going because I didn't want their caring attention to stop. So this is pissing me off because anybody who lies about having cancer obviously is evil and a bad person or mentally ill. But this is pissing me off because remember, Erin's telling her Facebook friends oh, these people haven't even picked up a phone to ask me how I'm doing. And now she's testifying with a straight face in court. I was getting gastric bypass surgery. I wanted the help of my in-laws, who I knew would be there for me. If I had this critical illness that I needed help with, I knew they would be there for me. So instead of being honest about the surgery I was having, I pretended I had ovarian cancer. And then she's also saying oh, I never said I was diagnosed with it. But then she's saying I did lead them to believe that I was going to have to undergo some treatment. Well, if you haven't been diagnosed with something, why would you have to undergo treatment? So she's full of shit. The cancer thing was definitely to get them all there, including Simon. In fact, she probably thought that telling them that she was terminally ill and kind of planting the seeds and leaving all these breadcrumbs that she had cancer, she probably thought that was the only thing she could do to get Simon there. And when she realized that even that wasn't going to get him there, it probably made her even more angry and feel more betrayed, honestly. So during the trial, the prosecution accused Erin of thinking she would never have to come face to face with this cancer lie because she expected all four of her guests to die and then take the secret of her lies about cancer with them to their graves. And Ian Wilkinson survived, right? So he was able to tell the police and to testify yeah, this bitch said she had cancer, right? Even Simon's father, Don, when Simon saw him, after this lunch, totally sick in the hospital, Don was still so worried about Erin and her cancer diagnosis that she had told him about. He talked to Simon about it because he's dying in the hospital, thinking he's got food poisoning, not knowing what's going on with him. And he's still so concerned about Erin because he's a good person that he's saying to Simon, hey, your wife has ovarian cancer. She's really concerned about telling the kids. He was worried about her. So she definitely said that. So that evening, Simon arrived to Erin's home with his children. Remember, he picked them up from the movie. He was dropping his son and his son's friend off. He said he didn't go inside, but he did see that his parents' car was still in the driveway. So he dropped off his son and the friend, and then he left with his daughter, bringing her back home later at 9 p.m. that evening. So after lunch and when her guests had left, Erin drove her son's friend home and then brought her son to Subway to get some food. She never mentioned feeling sick before going to bed that night to anyone, even though later she would tell everyone, oh yeah, within hours of, eating the lunch, I felt sick. But then she also said that, I think it was Gail. I think Gail brought a cake, some fruity cake. And then Heather had brought a fruit plate. And Erin said after her guests had left, she'd binged eaten this whole entire orange cake. And so she thought she was sick because she'd eaten the whole cake. That's what Erin said. So on the morning of July 30th, Don and Gal Patterson called their son Simon and told him they had been violently ill since midnight the previous night, and so they'd gotten up and they'd driven themselves to the hospital. Now, with death cap mushroom poisoning, symptoms are delayed. They usually don't appear until 6 to 24 hours after ingestion. And by the time the GI issues start, the GI issues, I'm talking about the vomiting, the running to the bathroom, by the time those symptoms are showing, the liver and kidneys are already under attack. So for quite a while, the person might feel completely fine and have no issues. But during this time, this silent period, they call it, the amatoxins are being absorbed and heading to the liver and targeting the liver. And it's a really painful way to die. We talked about this in the first episode. Really horrible, painful way to die. When the symptoms do start, they are bad. Horrible nausea, stomach cramps, violent vomiting, constant diarrhea, which leads to severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. Most people think that what they're experiencing is food poisoning, but they don't know that their vital organs are under attack. And food poisoning is going to have a much more sudden onset. It's not going to take hours, 6 to 24 hours, for you to feel the effects of food poisoning. You're going to feel it pretty soon after eating. So when Simon heard that his parents were ill, and that they'd been transported to Dandenong Hospital by ambulance, he tried to call his aunt and uncle, but they didn't answer the phone, so he drove to their house. And Simon said that his uncle Ian answered the door, and he looked really bad. His skin was gray. He was struggling. His Aunt Heather wasn't doing much better. She was sitting on the couch holding a bucket that she was constantly vomiting into. And Simon was like, I'm driving you guys to the hospital. And Ian went to go grab a few things, and when he was doing that, Heather talked to Simon about the lunch the previous day, and Simon said that she was puzzled, and she'd noticed that Erin had served them their lunch on gray plates, but her plate was different. And in the car on the way to Corumburra Hospital, Heather brought up the plates again. Simon said, quote, she mentioned the colored plate again. She asked me, is Erin short of crockery? Is that why she would have this different colored plate that she served herself with? End quote. Erin's short of something, but it ain't crockery. Actually, Simon did say, like, Erin doesn't have a lot of plates. She's got like 8 plates and not all of them match. But let's be honest here, okay? Like, she definitely intentionally served herself the meal on a completely different plate so she wouldn't get poisoned. So basically, all 4 of the lunch guests initially went to Corumburra Hospital. That's the closest one to their homes. When Ian and Heather arrived, the hospital was overwhelmed. There was no available beds, so the staff there sent the Wilkinsons to Leongatha Hospital. And Gail and Don Patterson had gotten to Corumburra earlier when the hospital was less busy. They went in earlier, and then tests were run, and the medical staff had detected alarming liver abnormalities. So this led to their urgent transfer to Dandenong Hospital that same day, night, for higher level care, because all this is happening in kind of the overnight into the early morning hours. Now, Dr. Beth Morgan at Dandenong ran some tests on Don Patterson, which indicated he may have been suffering from liver damage, and she became concerned that the Pattersons did not have food poisoning. So Morgan called the toxicology registrar, who requested information about the last meal the patients had eaten, which would have been the beef Wellington with the poisonous mushrooms. The registrar expressed concern due to the delayed onset of the symptoms, how long it took for the symptoms to start. Like I said, if it was food poisoning, they would have started sooner. And so the registrar was worried that the Pattersons may have ingested death cap mushrooms. Meanwhile, Gail Patterson was doing much better than Don, and it had been determined that she was actually suffering from food poisoning. But remember, she'd only eaten half of her lunch portion, and Don had eaten the other half. So he's going to be doing way worse than she is. Now, after follow-up tests on Gail showed that she was getting worse, the decision was made to give both Don and Gail a medication called Silibin, which is supposed to be the antidote to death cap mushroom poisoning. Now, when Simon saw his parents at the hospital, he saw they were both not doing well, but that his father was doing and feeling significantly worse than his mother. He said Don was hunched over, lying on his side. His face was discolored, speaking to a great amount of effort because of the level of pain he was feeling. And Don was able to tell Simon in a strained and weak voice that Erin had informed them the day before that she'd been diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And Simon's like, well, this is news to me. But that's what he was told. So meanwhile, Dr. Christopher Webster was caring for Ian and Heather Wilkinson at Leongatha Hospital, and he made the decision to give them both some anti-nausea medication and something for stomach acid. And this was a treatment they both initially responded well to. That's another issue with the death cap mushroom poisoning, is it can seem as if it's getting better, but it's not. It's getting worse inside. So outside, you seem like you're doing better. Inside, it's like rearing up for its final blow. But then Dr. Beth Morgan called Dr. Webster from Dandenong Hospital and informed him that her 2 patients who had eaten the same food as his 2 patients were suffering from death cap mushroom poisoning, and she suggested that the Wilkinsons also be treated with Silibin, the antidote. All right, so back at Erin's house, all this is going down at these hospitals. Back at Erin's house, she allegedly told her children that she wasn't feeling well, and then she spent the day running errands before serving her kids dinner at 5 p.m., a dinner that she claimed contained leftovers from the previous day's lunch. Now, Erin would later tell her husband and people at the hospital and the police that she'd scraped the mushrooms off the meat because her kids didn't like mushrooms and wouldn't eat them. This is interesting because as it turns out, the police and prosecutors and everything talked to both the children. The children did eat some sort of like meat thing, but it wasn't a beef Wellington. It didn't, have the dough wrapped around it. And Erin told them they were eating leftovers from the night before, but what they were eating wasn't anything like the beef Wellington she'd prepared. So obviously no one believes that she served her kids the leftovers. Erin also spoke to Simon that night, and he told her that his relatives were sick, and Erin claimed she was also sick. She was experiencing stomach issues that had started the previous afternoon after the lunch and had continued on through the night. And Erin made a big deal about this. She claimed she hadn't gone to church that day because her stomach was so bad and she was running to the bathroom so often that she was afraid she would soil herself. However, CCTV footage also shows Erin at a store that day because she's running errands all day. And it was a grocery store, and she did use the bathroom there, but she was only inside for 9 seconds before she casually browsed around the rest of the store before purchasing some food items and leaving, not having to emergently run to the bathroom at any time. Now, on the morning of July 31st, when doctors at both Dandenong and Leongatha hospitals had already started talking to each other about the cases of poisonings, Erin got up and drove her 2 kids to school. She then texted Simon, and she was like, "Hey, I'm still feeling sick." She asked him if he could drive her to the hospital because she was having to run to the bathroom every 20 minutes, and she was afraid if she drove herself to the hospital, she would have an accident. And Simon basically told her, I got my hands full with sick relatives. Like, my parents are in the hospital, my aunt and uncle are in the hospital. They're really not doing well. You can get yourself to the hospital, lady. Okay, I'm not going to come over there and drive you. Ridiculous. Agreed, Simon. Agree. I agree with you there. So Erin arrived to Leongatha Hospital at 8:05 a.m., 5 minutes after Dr. Veronica Foote arrived for her shift, and Dr. Foote was informed by Dr. Webster that the lunch guests were being treated for death cap poisoning. So by the time that Erin got there and revealed that she was the 5th lunch guest, the medical staff knew how important it was to get her examined and tested and hopefully started on treatment as soon as possible, right? Because if you are struggling with a toxin that's trying to poison you, you want to get the antidote as soon as possible. But Erin was only at the hospital for 5 minutes. And when the director of nursing attempted to get Erin into a cubicle for an exam, Erin refused. She was like, "I don't want to be here. I just, want to make sure I'm okay, and I can't be here." The nurse went to Dr. Foote and asked her to talk to Erin and try to reason with Erin and convince her to stay. And by the time Dr. Foote reached Erin, she was already at the door on her way out of the hospital. She had discharged herself against medical advice at 8:05 a.m. Erin told Dr. Foote that she wasn't able to stay at the hospital at that time because she had to make arrangements for her animals and her children, but she'd be back within 30 minutes. Dr. Christopher Webster, also briefly spoke to Erin and told her how serious the situation was. So when she went ahead and discharged herself anyways, he was stunned. And he said, quote, "I had just informed her that she'd been exposed to a potential death cap mushroom poisoning," end quote. He literally couldn't understand her thought process because he had told her that Don and Gal Patterson had already been transferred to intensive care and that Ian and Heather Wilkinson were being transferred to a larger hospital because they needed more intensive care. And Erin was like, "Well, I'm going to go for a bit. Maybe I'll be back whenever." And he's like, "What? What? Are you not listening to me?" He couldn't believe it. It shocked him. And when Erin did not return to the hospital within that 30-minute time frame she said she would, Dr. Webster became concerned, and he called her cell phone 3 times. He left an urgent voicemail each time, and in these voicemails, Dr. Webster apologized but told her, "Listen, if you don't come back here for your own health and wellness, I have to call the police. I've got to call the police on you if you don't come back here, so you need to come back." Erin would eventually go back to the hospital at 9:48 a.m. We don't really have any idea what she did during that time. We do know that her cell phone connected to mobile towers in Leongatha, Coonawarra, and Outram. What exactly was Erin doing after she left the hospital around 8 and didn't come back to almost 10? Your guess is as good as mine. But when she got back to the hospital, Dr. Webster began asking Erin questions about the food she had prepared. He asked where she'd gotten the mushrooms she'd used for the recipe, and she said, from Woolworth's, which is a grocery store. He asked her if anyone else beside herself, the Wilkinses, and her in-laws had eaten the meal, and she mentioned that she'd heated up the food for her kids the next day, but she'd scraped the mushrooms off. At 10:04 a.m., Dr. Webster got a call from the police who were at Erin's home for the welfare check that he'd called in, and Webster Webster asked Erin for permission for the police to enter her house and collect the leftover beef Wellington, and Erin agreed, and she told the police that the leftover food would be in a brown Woolworths bag, most likely in the outdoor garbage, which is where it was found, so they didn't have to enter the house at that time, and Senior Constable Adrian Martinez Villabis collected the meal remnants, drove the bag with the leftover beef Wellington to Leongatha Hospital, where it was taken by medical staff. While all of this was going down, Erin was finally allowing herself to be examined at the hospital, even though she kept saying she didn't want any intervention, and she was like pouting and really being uncooperative. Dr. Veronica Foote noted that Erin's heart rate started off high when she was first being examined, but it soon came down to a normal heart rate. And Dr. Foote was like, yeah, if you're like stressed and anxious, you'll see that your heart rate's elevated, but if it goes down, then it's not a sign of like an illness, like a food poisoning or a deadly death cap mushroom poisoning. And Cindy Monroe, the deputy director of nursing who had cared for Ian Wilkinson before his transfer, also saw Erin upon her return to the hospital, and Monroe said, quote, "She didn't look unwell like Heather and Ian. I recall Ian being so unwell he couldn't lift his head from the pillow, but Erin was sitting up on the bed from the trolley, and she didn't look unwell to me," end quote. And a lot of the people who saw Erin at various hospitals, they were like, we don't understand, because she came in and when she was asked about her symptoms upon like her first exam, she was like, I'm sick, I have GI issues, I gotta run to the bathroom every couple of minutes, like I can't control myself, whether I'm throwing up or I'm in the bathroom, I can't control it. But they never saw her emergently having to run to the bathroom. They never saw her using the bathroom all that much. So the decision was made to give Erin something called NAC, which does have a full technical medical name. I'm not going to try to pronounce it. You guys will tear me apart. But it's a modified form of the amino acid cysteine or cysteine and acts as a precursor to glutathione, which protects cells from oxidative damage and helps detoxify the liver. So in this case, the NAC was being used as protection for the liver. This isn't the antidote. This is just a liver protection agent. So they were giving the Wilkinsons and the Pattersons a bunch of stuff. They gave them like this charcoal thing to drink so it would like absorb, whatever was in their stomach. And they were giving them liver protection medication because the poisoning affects the liver very intensely. And so Erin did not get the antidote ever to the death cap mushroom poisoning, the Silibin, but she did get the NAC, which was a liver protection agent. And Monroe was tasked with administering this medication to Erin, but while she was trying to insert the cannula, Erin told Cindy Monroe that she didn't want the treatment. And Monroe was like, listen, lady, what are you talking about? You ate the meal. You're getting the NAC. Like, there's not an option right now. So Erin then told Cindy Monroe that her children had also eaten the meal, and then she was told that it was imperative to have her children tested because even if Erin had scraped the mushrooms off, the toxin could have still leaked into the meat during like cooking and stuff. At this point, Monroe testified that Erin became very teary-eyed and worried, yet still the message that Cindy Monroe continued to get from Erin was that she didn't want her children involved in any of this. Dr. Christopher Webster then became involved, telling Erin that she needed to get her kids to a medical facility to be tested immediately, and Erin told Dr. Webster that she was reluctant to do this as she did not want her kids to be frightened, and Dr. Webster told her, quote, "They can be scared and alive or dead," end quote. And Webster said it was at this point that Erin seemed to recognize the urgency, and she promised that she would have her husband, Simon, get the kids to Monash Hospital, which was one of the largest and most advanced public hospitals in Victoria. It's about an hour and a half away from where they all lived. So then Erin spoke to Dr. Connor McDermott on the phone. McDermott was the toxicology registrar at Austin Hospital in Melbourne. That's the home to the Victorian Poisons Information Center. So if anybody in that area in Victoria has issues about like poison or needs advice or needs help if they believe they've been poisoned, that's who they would call. And McDermott had already been told that Erin was in stable condition. Her test results were normal for the most part, and she'd been complaining of having diarrhea for the past 36 hours, even though no staff at Leongatha had observed her having to run to the bathroom constantly while she'd been there. And so McDermott asked Erin about the mushrooms she'd used in the beef Wellington, and she told him she'd purchased pre-sliced button mushrooms mushrooms from the Safeway in Leongata, as well as some dried mushrooms from a Chinese grocer in Oakley. So Erin claimed she'd purchased these dried mushrooms months prior. They'd been unbranded and she'd thrown out the original packaging. McDermott then did an internet search for Chinese grocers in the Oakley area, and he offered to read a list of them off to Erin so she could tell him which store she'd purchased the dried mushrooms from. And she told McDermott, "You could read them all to me, and I still wouldn't be able to remember where I bought them from. It was months ago." "What are you talking about? It was months ago. I have no idea." Since Erin knew that her children were being brought to Monash Hospital by Simon, she requested a transfer to the same hospital. And at 12:30 p.m., she sent Simon a text saying, quote, "They're arguing with me now, saying I might have to go to Dandenong. This doctor is not listening to me and being a bit mean about it," end quote. So Erin just wants attention from Simon at this point. She wants him to be worried about her. She wants him to be as worried about her as he is about his parents and his aunt and uncle. And she's also trying to make it seem worse. Like she's being treated badly by these people. Around that same time, Elaine Spencer, a paramedic at Leongata, responded to a call to transfer Erin to Monash Medical Center along with samples from the beef Wellington lunch. Now, Erin told Spencer and another paramedic that she'd been having to use the bathroom 25 to 30 times over the past 2 days. And so Spencer told Erin, "Hey, the drive to Monash, it's going to take 90 minutes. If you need to urgently use the bathroom, just tell us. We'll make arrangements. We'll stop. We'll pull over. We'll get you to a bathroom." Spoiler alert, Erin did not need to use the bathroom once during that long 90-minute drive. Not once. And at 12:53 p.m., Erin texted Simon saying, quote, "I'm going to Clayton, squeaky wheel," end quote. She's going to Clayton, meaning she's going to Monash. And he replied back at 1:03 p.m., quote, "Nice work. We're on our way there now. Kids are in good spirits," end quote. And when Erin says squeaky wheel, she means the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? The person who is kind of like a Karen about things, the person who's kind of like complaining and making a menace of themselves and not taking no for an answer, they're going to get what they want. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. And it kind of seems like that was her general ideology about life, that she should get what she wants because she's smart, she knows what she's talking about, she has autonomy, and anyone who doesn't sort of cater to that is an enemy who betrays her. So by the time Erin arrived at Monash Hospital, Simon and the kids were already there, and at 4:03 p.m., Erin texted Simon, quote, "I feel nauseous and sore tummy, but they've given me some ondansetron and saline and fentanyl," end quote. Erin had received fentanyl in the ambulance because she told the paramedics that she had a 7 out of 10 headache, and since they believed her liver might have already been compromised and Tylenol could have potential side effects on the liver, they went with fentanyl. And they said afterwards, Erin was, totally laid back and chill, totally fine, which, yeah, she's jacked up on fentanyl. She's going to be fairly calm and nonchalant. That's what they used to describe her. She was fairly calm and nonchalant for the rest of the ride. I would expect her to be, yes. So Simon did stop over to see how Erin was doing at the hospital, and they had a conversation where Erin talked about using dehydrated mushrooms in a batch of muffins she had fed their daughter. Erin said she'd done a blind taste test with the muffins, and their daughter actually preferred the muffins with the dehydrated mushrooms in them, even though everyone knew this daughter did not like mushrooms. It was well known that the little girl hated mushrooms, wouldn't eat anything with mushrooms in it. And Simon was like, "Well, this is news to me." And he testified that he had no knowledge of Erin dehydrating food. He didn't even know she owned a food dehydrator. And it was weird because now she's talking about using this food dehydrator to dehydrate mushrooms and hide them in food. It's like she's telling on herself. So at Monash Hospital, Erin was assessed by Dr. Laura Muldoon, who at that time was a toxicology registrar at that hospital. And Erin told Dr. Muldoon that she'd purchased the dried mushrooms from a Chinese grocer in Oakley or Glen Waverly. And when Muldoon asked Erin if she'd ever foraged for mushrooms before, Erin denied ever doing that, which we know is not true. And in the trial, Erin will be like, "Yeah, I did forage. I started foraging for mushrooms in 2020 during the pandemic. It became a hobby. I did it all the time," right? Yeah, I definitely did. And I definitely lied about not foraging mushrooms. And the following morning, August 1st, Dr. Muldoon checked on Erin, and Erin said she was feeling better. Her blood test had come back normal. Her vital signs were fine. And Dr. Muldoon then handed Erin over to Dr. Varuna Ragu with notes that Dr. Muldoon was not concerned that Erin was suffering from death cap mushroom poisoning. Dr. Ragu also assessed Erin and found that Erin was clinically well and had not been experiencing any GI issues that morning. Erin was then discharged from the hospital at 1 p.m., okay? So Erin's discharged. You can go. You are not poisoned. And while it was determined that Erin Patterson was in full health, Don, Gail, Heather, and Ian were all doing worse at the hospitals, and their health was declining fast. So at this point, there were a lot of people who wanted to talk to Erin Patterson. The Department of Families had received a report about the Patterson children, prompting child protection practitioner Katrina Cripps to meet with Simon, Erin, and their 2 children on August 1st. And when asked about her relationship with Simon's family, Erin told Katrina she loved them very much. She'd always felt supported by them. They'd always treated her like a daughter-in-law until the relationship between herself and Simon changed. And after this, Erin felt that Simon was isolating her from his family, and she stopped being invited to family events that she'd previously been included in. As far as I can tell, Gail's 70th birthday is the only event that Erin wasn't given plenty of notice about, that she wasn't included in, and she was included in that. It's just that her invitation was a little last minute. Now, Erin also told Katrina that her husband, Simon, was controlling and emotionally abusive at times, and he would often make her doubt herself as a parent and a mother and a person, right? And Erin said that her children had talked to her about not wanting to visit with their father on the weekends because they said he yelled at them and slept a lot. Now, Erin was once again asked about the mushrooms, where she'd purchased them from, and she said she'd gotten the fresh mushrooms from Woolworths and the dried ones from the Chinese grocer. She had added the dried mushrooms because she believed they would add a nice flavor to the beef Wellington. At that time, Katrina Cripps determined that the 2 children would remain in their mother's custody, but she would return to talk to Erin again the following day at her home, because remember, Erin's going to be discharged on August 1st. We're going to talk about that in a minute, because the Department of Health had also been trying to get in touch with Erin, and she was being unresponsive. So on August 2nd, Katrina Cripps from the Department of Family Services would have to facilitate a call between Erin and the Department of Health representative. But first, we have to talk about what else Erin did on August 2nd, 2023. So during the trial, we heard testimony that Erin Patterson was connected to 3 phones, 2 Samsungs and 1 Nokia. And this was actually very confusing to me. This took hours for me to kind of put little puzzle pieces together, but I think I was able to piece it together. We're going to talk about the phones in today's video and also the next video. So if I'm wrong about anything and you're, more educated about this phone topic than me, let me know in the comments, but I think I got it. So phone A would have been a pink Samsung Galaxy A23. And this would have been the main phone that Erin Patterson would be using. She had used this phone regularly from February of 2023 when she bought it to August of 2023. And she had purchased this new phone, and then it was linked to her main SIM card with a number ending in 783. Now, phone B was another Samsung device, and I believe this was the device she had used before she bought her new phone in February. And that secondary Samsung device had a secondary SIM, which had been used in a tablet prior to August 3rd. And then we have phone C. Phone C was a basic Nokia handset. And so in February of 2023, Erin was regularly using phone A and her son was using phone B. This was a phone she had previously used and that her son had factory reset on February 12th so that he could now use it, get all her stuff off so he could use it. Now on August 2nd, this is the day that Erin's meeting with Katrina Cripps. The health department's trying to get in touch with her. On August 2nd, Erin factory reset phone B again. That was the phone that her son was allegedly using. And then she's going to put a SIM card from the tablet into that phone. But we will talk about that soon, I promise. And then Erin took a trip to the Kunwara transfer station and landfill.
After tip manager Darren Canty got a tip-off from police in August 2023, he found a small electrical item at his South Gippsland facility. The CCTV footage from the Kunwara transfer station was shown to the jury in Erin Patterson's triple murder trial. It showed a four-wheel drive arrive at the tip. The female driver walks into a shed with the item and emerges empty-handed. An employee was asked to go and look for the deposited item. It kind of looked like a microwave/dehydrator, Mr Canty told the court. The trial also heard from mushroom researcher Dr Camille Trung, who was asked to identify the leftovers from the lunch, which police had found in Erin Patterson's bin. I opened the package. I saw it was a food item which contained mushrooms inside, Dr. Chung said. Did you find any death cap mushroom pieces? Crown Prosecutor Dr. Nanette Rogers asked. I didn't, Dr. Chung replied. Dr. Chung says she kept the sample in her home fridge, taking them to work for further examination the following day, where she again found no evidence of death caps. Under cross-examination, Colin Mandy asked Dr. Chung about the likelihood of poisoning occurring using store-bought mushrooms. The information that was available to you, there isn't records of people becoming ill from mushrooms sold in shops, defence lawyer Colin Mandy asked. Exactly, Dr. Chung replied. Erin Patterson has always maintained her innocence. Sasha Payne, ABC News, Morwell.
All right, so that's pretty suspicious, right? She's got a food dehydrator that she's talked about on Facebook, and she just told Simon about it. She just told Simon, like, I've been using this food dehydrator to trick my daughter into eating mushroom muffins. And now she's getting rid of it. So it's pretty obvious what's happening here. She's getting rid of the evidence. And keep in mind, Erin Patterson has a reason and an excuse for every single thing that happened here. All the stuff that looks suspicious, her lying about the cancer, her getting rid of the food dehydrator, her lying about foraging for mushrooms, her doing factory resets. She's got a reason for everything. And we are going to talk about all of that. But back to the Department of Health and how they were trying to talk to Erin to figure out what happened here. And at first, not necessarily because they were suspicious of her, but because she was telling everyone and their mother that she got those dried mushrooms from some random Chinese grocery store in all different areas, by the way. She can't be consistent or keep her story straight about what town or village she bought them in. So obviously there's a public health interest in making sure that these deadly mushrooms weren't making their way into anyone else's beef Wellington. So Sally Ann Atkinson headed up a team at the Department of Health that specifically investigated gastro-related outbreaks, and she testified that as soon as she was alerted by medical staff of suspected death cap mushroom poisoning, she escalated the case, put together a team of people to respond to the issue, and this team of people did things like, checking out all of the stores in the areas that Erin Patterson indicated she had purchased the mushrooms at so that they could hopefully remove them from the shelves. And also, this team would speak to Erin. And Sally Atkinson specifically did this herself on August 1st. And Erin told Sally Atkinson the same story she told everyone else. She said everyone at the lunch had eaten the same meal, and then she'd started to feel sick after the lunch, and her symptoms continued for the next several days. And Erin also told Sally Atkinson that she'd made the dish with a mixture of mushrooms from Woolworths and dried mushrooms from the Chinese grocer, which was located in Oakley or Clayton or Mount Waverly. And remember, she's told other people Glen Waverly. She's told other people Oakley. Clayton now, right? We've got a bunch of different areas. But then Erin later told Sally Atkinson that the store could have also been in the Glen Waverly area, to increase the energy and time needed for this wild goose chase. Atkinson also testified that what Erin told her happened in the months after she purchased the dried mushrooms changed and was different every time she retold the story. So remember, Erin said, hey, I got these fresh button mushrooms from Woolworths like a day or two before lunch. I brought these dried mushrooms months before. And initially, Erin had told Sally Atkinson that she'd purchased the dried mushrooms specifically for a pasta dish, a carbonara she was planning to make. And Atkinson testified that it had been her understanding that Erin had actually used some of the dried mushrooms in this carbonara dish. But then later, Erin changed her story and was like, no, you were mistaken. I never used the dried mushrooms before. The first and only time I ever used them was for these beef Wellingtons. And then Erin told Sally Ann Atkinson that she hadn't used the dried mushrooms in the carbonara because when she first opened the bag, she'd noticed they'd smelled funny, so she decided against using them in the dish. And later, Erin would also testify that she'd put the mushrooms in her dehydrator because she noticed they were rubbery at some time between her buying them and using them, and she was like, oh, this isn't right, like, can I fix this? And during the trial, Dr. Thomas May, who's a fungi expert, he testified about how he'd previously smelled death cap mushrooms before. And he was like, yeah, they smell terrible. He really disliked their strong, pungent smell. And this led to Nanette Rogers, who's one of the lawyers with the prosecution against Erin, to say, quote, "It just doesn't make sense that someone would add something that smelled very unpleasant into a special meal," end quote, which is valid, right? Because Erin kept going on and on about how she'd never made beef Wellington before and how she had decided to take on the task for this lunch because she wanted it to be a very special meal. And she told Simon that she might not be able to undertake a meal like this again for quite a while because of her health issues. But Erin also claimed to a bunch of people that she'd purchased the mushrooms to use in a carbonara, but didn't use them because she didn't like the strong smell they produced. And she was like, hey, maybe there's something off about these mushrooms, right? She also said they were rubbery, and she's trying to fix that rubberiness. So why would she choose to use these questionable dried mushrooms when she's already got fresh button mushrooms in this very special meal she was preparing? And once again, she had testified, I thought it would give it an interesting taste, but not for the carbonara, but for the Wellington. So Erin told different stories to people who worked at the Department of Health. Right? She's not just telling different stories to people who won't talk to each other and figure out that she's telling different stories. She's telling different stories to people who work in the same department of the same, business. It's crazy. She told one person that the mushrooms had come in a sealed package, but after she opened them, she'd moved them to another container where she stored them until she used them and she threw the original packaging out. She then told Sally Atkinson from the Department of Health that the mushrooms had come in a package that wasn't sealed. It was a clear plastic bag. It was smaller than a sandwich bag with a sticky handwritten white label. And it was funny because Sally Atkinson testified and she said she'd sent Erin a picture of different bags, or she'd shown Erin different bags, clear plastic bags, and told Erin, tell me what size it was that the mushrooms came in, which bag size. And Erin picked the absolute smallest bag. And then Sally Ann Atkinson was like, that's impossible because the amount of mushrooms that she said came in that bag that she bought from the Chinese grocer, the alleged Chinese grocer, the scapegoat, that wouldn't have fit in the bag that she picked out. So there was just all sorts of inconsistencies and things that didn't make sense. And then Sally Ann Atkinson also testified that, she was able to speak to Erin initially on August 1st, but then Erin suddenly became very hard to get in touch with, and she wasn't answering calls or messages, so Atkinson had to arrange with Katrina Cripps from the Department of Children and Families on August 2nd to get Erin on the phone, right? Because Katrina Cripps had an appointment at Erin's home, so Atkinson had to call Cripps, and Cripps had to hand Erin the phone while she was in her home because Erin wouldn't answer the calls from the Department of Health otherwise. So, yeah. And then while she's there, right, the Department of Health is once again asking about the mushrooms. Where did you buy them from? Is there any way you can check? And Erin was like, here, I'll go through my phone, and check my bank records. And Katrina Cripps said she saw Erin scrolling through her phone. She didn't see what she was doing on the phone, but she saw her doing it. And then Erin was like, no, I didn't use my, bank card. I probably used cash because it was such a small amount. How convenient. And according to the prosecution, just in one day, which was on July 31st, Erin had told 7 different people, 7 different versions of where she'd bought the dried mushrooms. The location changed, the description of the bag changed, the description of the area. So at first she said, she thought the Chinese grocery store was in a strip mall, and then maybe it was a standalone. It was just all over the place. And the prosecution was like, I don't understand how Erin can have such a very specific description of this bag. It was a clear bag and it was smaller than a small sandwich bag and it had a handwritten white sticky label. She's got all this detail about this bag, but no accurate or genuine recollection of the store, what it looked like, where it was located, anything about it. She can say nothing about this store. She knows nothing about it. So was this your first time going to the store? Had you never been to this store? Were you in an alternate parallel universe where the store existed, but then you returned to our universe and it doesn't exist anymore? What's going on here, right? There's so much more to discuss, but this video is getting very long and it's going to have to wait until next time. Like I said, I promise you this video will be out within a few days. I will not leave you hanging. I will not make you wait a week. I promise. And then we can go over together all of Erin's rebuttals to all the damning evidence, and we can talk together about how ridiculous she is, that she actually thought any of this was going to work and that she wouldn't look suspicious, walking out of the hospital 2 days later, completely fine, while all her other guests were literally dying in intensive care and going into comas. Nobody was going to be like, hey, Erin, it's weird that you ate the same food, but you're still alive and not, in poor health at all. No one was going to ask any questions. We're also going to finish going over the evidence. Like, I'm still not done talking about all Erin's phones and her SIM cards and her factory resets. There's still so much to discuss with the actual toxicology of the mushrooms and what they found. So we have a lot to talk about. And like I said, Erin's explanation for everything. She's like, I know I lied, but it's not because I'm, suspicious. It's because of this. I know I lied, but it's not because I wanted anyone to be lured over to my house. It's because I was getting gastric bypass surgery. There's so many things that she says. It's absolutely crazy. I don't know if she should have testified. I probably wouldn't have. I probably wouldn't have suggested as her legal representation that she does testify, but she did. And it didn't help because the jury still found her guilty because she's guilty. But anyways, stay tuned for all that. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, stay safe. I love you so much. I'll see you very soon.